There's a version of you that never sleeps. Not your body. Your body rests. But something inside you keeps going, replaying the conversation from 3 days ago, rehearsing argument that will never happen, building entire futures out of worst case scenarios. You know what I'm talking about. That voice, the one that shows up right when you're about to fall asleep. The one that takes a simple question, did I say the wrong thing? And turns it into a 2-hour trial where you're both the defendant and the judge. Most people call this overthinking, but that word is too small for what it actually is. Because this isn't just thinking too much. This is a mind that doesn't trust silence. A mind that believes if it stops, even for a second, something terrible will slip through. And the strangest part, the more intelligent you are, the worse it tends to get. So today, we're going to go somewhere most people are afraid to look. Not to fix you, but to understand what's actually happening inside that restless mind of yours. Here's something nobody tells you about overthinking. It doesn't feel like a problem. Not at first. It feels like intelligence. It feels like preparation. Like you're the one person in the room who actually thinks things through, who considers consequences, who doesn't just act impulsively and hope for the best. And in some ways that's true, but there's a line. And most people who overthink crossed that line so long ago, they don't even remember what it felt like to be on the other side. The mind at some point stopped being a tool you use and became something that uses you. Think about it this way. Imagine a guard dog, loyal, alert, trained to protect. That's your mind doing its job. But now imagine that dog, locked inside a house with no intruder, no threat, nothing to protect against. It starts barking at shadows, at sounds from the street, at nothing. That's what chronic overthinking looks like from the inside. The mechanism is still running. The protection system is still active, but there's nothing real to protect against. So it takes a look someone gave you at dinner and builds a story. It takes a pause in a text conversation and writes an ending. It takes uncertainty, which is just life, just Tuesday, and turns it into evidence that something is wrong. And the exhausting part isn't the thinking itself, it's that you can't turn it off. Let me ask you something. When did you learn that it wasn't safe to relax? Because nobody's born like this. Nobody comes into the world already rehearsing tomorrow's disasters at 2 a.m. This is something that gets built slowly, quietly, usually in places we stopped thinking about a long time ago. For some people, it started in a home where things were unpredictable, where the mood in the room could shift without warning, and the only way to feel safe was to read every signal, anticipate every reaction, stay one step ahead of whatever was coming. For others, it was subtler than that. A parent who worried constantly, a childhood where mistakes had weight, a world that taught you very early that if you weren't careful, if you weren't always thinking, always prepared, something would go wrong and it would be your fault. So you learned to think ahead. You learned to cover every angle, and it worked. It genuinely worked for a while. The problem is the mind doesn't know when to stop applying old solutions to situations that no longer need them. You're not in that house anymore. That room doesn't exist. But the nervous system never got the memo. It's still scanning, still preparing, still running the same software on completely different hardware. Jung called this the shadow of adaptation. The strategies we built to survive ended up becoming the cage we live in. And the cage feels so familiar by now that most people mistake it for their personality. They say, I'm just an anxious person. I'm just a worrier. That's just who I am. But that's not who you are. That's what you learn to do. There's something deeply ironic at the heart of overthinking. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The whole point of all that mental activity, all that analysing, rehearsing, predicting, is to feel more in control, to reduce uncertainty, to make sure nothing catches you off guard. But here's what actually happens. The more you try to think your way to certainty, the more uncertain you feel. The more you analyse a decision, the harder it becomes to make it. The more you rehearse a conversation, the more unnatural you become when it actually happens. Overthinking doesn't reduce the chaos, it multiplies it. And there's a reason for that. The mind, when left to run without direction, doesn't move toward answers. It moves toward more questions. That's its nature. You pull on one thread and 3 more appear. You solve one fear and it quietly opens a door to another. It's not a ladder taking you somewhere. It's a corridor that keeps extending. Psychologists have a term for this: rumination, from the Latin word for what cows do when they chew the same food over and over again. And the image is almost too perfect, because that's exactly what it feels like, isn't it? The same thought, chewed again, turned over, chewed once more, not because it's getting more nutritious, but because the jaw doesn't know how to stop. And the cruel twist is this: the harder you try to stop thinking about something, the louder it gets. Tell yourself not to think about a red door, and suddenly there's a red door everywhere. The resistance becomes the fuel. So the question isn't, how do you think less? The question is something far more uncomfortable than that. What are you actually afraid would happen if you let yourself stop? Most people never ask that question. Not really. Because the overthinking, as exhausting as it is, serves a purpose. It keeps you busy. And when the mind is busy, it doesn't have to feel what's underneath all that noise. Sit with that for a second, because this is the part that changes everything. Overthinking isn't the problem. It's the solution your mind invented for a problem it didn't know how to face directly. Underneath all those thoughts, underneath the replaying and the rehearsing and the what ifs, there is usually something much quieter, much older, a feeling that you are not enough, or that you are too much, or that the people around you will eventually see something in you that you've been hiding, even from yourself. Not a thought, a feeling. And feelings don't respond to logic. You can't think your way out of a feeling any more than you can argue with the weather. But here's what the restless mind tries to do anyway. It tries to think around the feeling, over it, past it. It builds elaborate structures of analysis, hoping that somewhere in the architecture the feeling will dissolve. It never does, because what a feeling wants, what it has always wanted, is not an answer. It wants to be felt. There's a particular kind of silence that overthinkers are terrified of. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence inside, the moment when the mental noise fades, just enough that something real starts to surface. That silence feels dangerous. It feels like falling, but it's not falling. It's the first solid ground you've touched in years. The ancient Stoics understood something about this. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ran an empire, who had every reason to live entirely in his head, wrote that the thing which disturbs us is never the event itself. It is always the story we construct around it. And the story, he knew, was always about something we hadn't yet been willing to look at directly. Nobody wants to hear this part, because this is where most self-help stops making sense, where the advice starts to feel hollow. Just be present, just breathe, just let go. As if the mind that has been running for 20 years is going to slow down because someone told it to. So let me say something different. You don't escape this by fighting it, and you don't escape it by surrendering to it either. The way out is something quieter than both of those things. It starts with a single, almost unremarkable shift. Instead of asking, what should I do about this thought? You ask, what is this thought trying to protect me from? That's it. That's the whole move. And it sounds small, but it changes the entire relationship between you and your own mind. Because suddenly, the thought is no longer the enemy. It's a messenger, a very loud, very exhausted messenger who has been knocking on the same door for years because nobody ever opened it. When you stop trying to silence the thought and start getting curious about it, something unexpected happens. It softens, not immediately, not completely, but there's a loosening, like a fist that's been clenched for so long, it forgot it was clenching. Carl Jung spent his entire life mapping this territory, and one of the things he kept returning to was the idea that what we refuse to face doesn't disappear. It goes underground, and underground it grows. But the reverse is also true. What we face, what we actually turn toward with honesty and without judgment, begins to lose its power over us. Not because we solved it, but because we finally stopped running from it. And here is what nobody tells you about that moment. The moment you stop running, you realize something that the overthinking was always trying to prevent you from realizing. That you were never as fragile as you feared. That the silence you were avoiding wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space that had been waiting for you the whole time. The mind that never rests doesn't need to be silenced. It needs to be heard. Really heard. Not managed, not medicated into quiet, not distracted into submission. Heard. And when that finally happens, when you sit with yourself the way you would sit with someone you genuinely love, the noise doesn't disappear all at once. But for the first time in a long time, it starts to feel like something you can live with. And then slowly, something you can move through. If you've made it here with me, to this point in the video, I want to say something before we close, not as a channel, as a person. This kind of content takes something from you to watch. It's not background noise. It asks you to actually look. And the fact that you're still here tells me something about you. It tells me you're not just looking for distraction. You're looking for something real. So if that's who you are, subscribe to this channel, because this is what we do here every week. We go to the places most people avoid. We ask the questions that don't have easy answers, and we do it together. Now, there's one last thing I haven't said yet, and it might be the most important thing in this entire conversation. We've talked about what overthinking is, where it comes from, what it protects, what lives underneath it. But there's a question that keeps surfacing, one that the restless mind itself never stops asking, even when it pretends to be searching for something else. Am I going to be okay? Not financially, not professionally, not in the eyes of other people, just okay as a human being underneath everything. And the mind, in all its running, in all its rehearsing and analysing and preparing, it has never once been able to answer that question, because that question was never meant for the mind. That question lives somewhere deeper than thought. And the people who find some kind of peace, not perfect peace, not the absence of hard days, but something that holds, they didn't find it by thinking harder. They found it by stopping long enough to realise that the question itself was always pointing inward, not to more analysis, to something underneath the analysis. There's a kind of person who has spent so long inside their own head that they've forgotten what it feels like to simply exist, not to plan existing, not to evaluate how they're existing, just to be here, in this room, in this body, in this moment that will never come again. That person is exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. And if that's you, if you recognise yourself somewhere in this conversation, then you already know that what you need isn't another framework, another technique, another way to manage the noise. What you need is permission. Permission to not have it figured out. Permission to be uncertain and still be worthy of your own life. Permission to put down, even for a few minutes, the enormous weight of trying to think your way to safety. The mind that never rests is not broken. It is brave in its own frightened way. It has been trying to protect you for a very long time. But you don't need that kind of protection anymore. You never needed to earn the right to be still. That was always yours. If something in this video reached you, share it, not with everyone. With 5 people who you think carry this quietly. The ones who seem fine on the outside and never stop thinking on the inside. They'll know what this is about. And leave a comment below, a real one, not just a reaction. Tell me what you're actually carrying right now, or tell me what you want us to go deeper on next. What question keeps you up at night that nobody around you is asking out loud? I read them, and I'll see you in the next one.